trading yard at Coyote Bluff wasn't a place for kindness. It was a pit of dust and sweat where whiskey turned men cruel, and the sun burned away anything soft left in their hearts. Horses shifted in their pens, dealers shouted over one another. A preacher's cracked voice tried to rise above the noise, hollering about salvation no one cared to hear. Jonas Calloway stood off to the side, hat brim low, waiting for the feed wagon he'd come to buy. He wasn't a man for crowds. Years on the open range that carved quiet into him, the kind that fills a man who's buried more friends than he's made. But even his silence couldn't drown out what was happening on that rough plank stage. A woman stood there, barefoot, wrists bound with coarse hemp rope. Her dress was torn along one sleeve. Her hair, once golden maybe, was now a dusty tangle that caught the afternoon light like dry straw. She didn't lift her head when the auctioneer barked, $3 for the mute one, obedient, God-fearing, and easy to keep. The laughter that followed was small and mean, like dogs growling over a bone. Jonas's jaw clenched. He wasn't the type to play hero. The world didn't reward that sort of foolishness. But something in her stillness, the way she didn't beg, didn't tremble, stirred something sharp in him. Shame, maybe. He'd seen cattle treated with more dignity. $2. Do I hear $3? The yard went quiet. Jonas felt the last coins in his pocket. He didn't even know why he spoke until the word left his mouth. 3. Heads turned. The auctioneer blinked, half surprised, half disappointed. There'd be no more sport to be had. Sold to the man with the black hat. Jonas stepped forward, handed over the coins, and cut the rope at her wrists with his pocket knife. Her skin was raw underneath. She didn't thank him, didn't look up, just rubbed her wrists slow like she was remembering they were hers again. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. No answer. She followed him through the crowd, quiet as a shadow, every step measured. When they reached his horse, she climbed up behind him without a word. Her hands rested lightly at his waist, her breath even. As they rode out of town, the sun dipped behind the ridge. Long shadows crawled across the trail. Jonas didn't look back. Coyote Bluff had a way of eating men whole. This time, he reckoned, it had lost its appetite. The woman behind him stayed silent. Not a sound, just the faint weight of her presence and the whisper of wind in the sagebrush. Somewhere deep inside, Jonas wondered if he'd bought a person or a ghost. But by the time the stars came out, he realized it didn't matter. He'd never met anyone whose silence spoke louder. Jonas's homestead sat 3 days' ride from the nearest saloon, 5 from anything called civilization. Just a square of stubborn earth fenced in by wire and grit. The house leaned like an old man with too many memories. When he brought her there, the world seemed to go even quieter. He showed her the well, the barn, the stove. She watched everything with those wide, uncertain eyes, but never spoke. Her silence wasn't empty, it listened. He'd lived with coyotes, cattle, and ghosts, and none had ever looked at him the way she did, like she was trying to remember what kindness used to sound like. He called her Lydia. It wasn't her name. He knew by the way her eyes flickered when he said it, but she didn't argue, just accepted it like a man accepts weather he can't change. Days rolled slow, marked by the squeak of the windmill and the scrape of boots on the porch. Lydia worked without being asked, mending torn shirts, sweeping the stoop, feeding the horses. She moved like someone who'd spent too long in other people's shadows.
Her silence stretched through the house until even the clock seemed afraid to tick. Jonas tried words now and then. "You can eat first. You can sleep inside. You don't owe me anything." None of them seemed to land anywhere. At night, the wind rattled the shutters, and he'd hear her pacing upstairs. Step, step, pause, like she was walking through memories that still hurt. Sometimes he'd think about the auction, the crowd's laughter, the preacher's hollow words, her bowed head, and every time it felt wrong in his bones. One evening he found her standing by the corral, watching the sun melt into blood-orange light. Her hair caught the blow just enough to remind him what life used to feel like. He wanted to speak, but the words died somewhere in his chest, so he just stood beside her. Two silhouettes breathing the same dust, and though the house behind them was empty, it somehow felt alive again, like silence itself had begun to change its meaning. The storm came sudden. One minute the air was still, the next it was roaring alive, thunder shaking the ground. Jonas stepped out to check the corral, just as the wind tore the barn door clean off its hinge. "Damn it," he muttered, pulling his coat tight as the rain came down in sheets. Inside, the horses were wild-eyed, kicking and slamming the stalls. Lightning flashed through the rafters. He grabbed a rope, shouting to calm them, but when the roof beam cracked, it was too late. The world went white. The beam fell. A blur of motion struck him hard, Lydia throwing herself forward, knocking him clear. They tumbled into the mud as the beam crashed where he had been standing. For a long moment, only rain and heartbeat filled the world. Jonas pushed himself up, breath ragged. Lydia lay beside him, soaked, shaking. "You all right?" he asked, though he knew she wouldn't answer. But this time she looked at him, really looked at him. Her eyes burned, alive, fierce, not afraid any more. He reached for her hand. She lit him. Her grip trembled, but held steady. The rain slowed to a whisper. They sat there, two strangers who'd nearly died for each other without a single word between them. Back inside, Jonas lit the fire. Lydia sat close, wrapped in a blanket. Firelight softened her bruises, old ones, fading but not forgotten. He poured her a cup of coffee and asked softly, "Who did that to you?" She didn't speak, just pressed a finger to her lips, a plea or a warning, and turned away. Later, as thunder rolled off into the hills, Jonas heard something faint, fragile. A voice. Her voice. She whispered, "Run." One word, barely breath, but it hit like a gunshot. By morning the storm was gone. The air smelled of wet dirt and smoke. Lydia was already helping clear the fallen boards, quiet, steady, focused. Then came the sound of hooves. 3 riders at the ridge, sunlight flashing off their rifles. The lead one called out, "Jonas Calloway! Heard you bought yourself a woman at the market." Jonas didn't move. "I buy feed, horses, and bad luck. Didn't know any were worth visiting over." The man smirked. "She's property of Harlan Briggs. Says she stole from his stores and ran." Lydia froze. Her hands gripped her skirt tight enough to whiten her knuckles. Jonas spat into the dust. "Funny. Don't recall property bleeding when you beat it." The man's smile faded. "You hidin' her?" Jonas's voice went low, calm as a storm before it breaks. "I ain't hidin' anyone. I ain't seen anyone. Now ride before the sun gets mean." They stared him down, measuring his calm against his rifle at his side. Then the lead man tipped his hat. "Tell her master we looked." They rode off, leaving only dust and tension behind. When Jonas turned back, Lydia sat at the table, hands trembling. "They burned my father's farm," she whispered, suddenly, her voice cracked and hoarse, like it hadn't been used in years. "Said he owed land, said silence would buy peace. He refused, so they made me watch." Her eyes stayed on the window as sunlight cut through the dust. "When I screamed, they said my tongue was worth less than dirt." She swallowed hard. "When I spoke, they made sure no one would ever listen again." Jonas's throat tightened. "You can speak now," he said. She looked at him, really looked at him. "Only when I remember I'm still alive." He reached for her hand. "Then remember, Lydia, you're not theirs anymore." That night, silence was no longer the same. It had weight now, truth in it. By dawn, the horizon bled red. Trouble was coming. He could feel it. He loaded his rifle, eyes steady. He said, "They'll come." She nodded. "Then we stay." When the riders appeared again, dust rising behind them, the air turned sharp. Harlan Briggs rode at the front, fat on stolen land, mean as a snake. "You've got something that's mine," he barked. Jonas stepped down from the porch, rifle low but ready. "She cost me $3, he said, evenly. The laughter that followed was cruel. Then, gunfire. The first bullet tore through the porch rail. Jonas dropped and fired back. Chaos bloomed in the dust. Lydia ran to the barn, grabbed the old shotgun. Her hands shook, but her aim didn't. One shot, one rider down. Briggs turned, eyes wild. Jonas charged him, both crashing into the dirt. Fists, grit, fury. When the dust settled, it was over. Jonas was bleeding, breath ragged. Briggs lay still. Lydia dropped the shotgun and knelt beside him. "Jonas," she said, just his name, soft, trembling, but alive. He smiled through the pain. "Guess $3 finally bought something worth keeping." She pressed her forehead to his, tears mixing with dirt. "No," she whispered, "it bought freedom." As the sun rose, the wind carried away the scent of gunpowder. The horses grazed quietly near the fence, and in that open stillness of the desert, two souls stood free. That evening, they left Coyote Bluff behind, heading west, where the land glowed gold and the sky began again. She didn't speak much after that, not because she feared to. Some silences are peace, and Jonas, riding beside her, found that quiet finally sounded like home. If her story touched your heart, take a moment, partner. Like this tale, drop a comment, and subscribe. It keeps the campfire burning for the next ride. Where are you listening from tonight? The plains? The mountains? The coast? Tell me down in the comments. I'd sure like to know how far these stories travel, because this is Unreal Frontier, where every silence hides a heartbeat, and every heartbeat tells a story worth hearing. So saddle up, like, comment, and subscribe if you believe mercy still breathes in the dust of the Old West.